Removing Selfishness, Self-Analysis and Devotion, May 26, 2019. Swami replied, O learned and devoted servants of God, self-analysis and the knowledge of God. The basic I is not really the problem. The problem comes only when this basic I gets associated with the qualities of rajas and tamas. It then takes the form of egotism or pride and ignorance, respectively. The cancellation of the I means the cancellation of egotism or pride. The difference between the basic ego, which is the person's self-identity, and the perverted ego should be carefully noted. It is only the perverted ego that has to be cancelled. The perversion of the basic ego happens due to ignorance, which makes the person think that he is this physical body alone. If one identifies one's basic ego with this physical body, all worldly bonds appear since they are related to the physical body. It leads to the perversion of the soul in many ways. The basic ego or I is like the seed. The stem that arises from this seed is the ignorance of identifying this I with the body. It is known as the basic ignorance or avidya. The branches arising from that stem are the worldly bonds. This analysis was given by Shankara, which helps us in detaching from the worldly bonds. In his commentary, Shankara referred to the worldly bonds by the word mama or mamakara, which means my. He writes in the commentary, Aham mameti naisargikoyam loka vyavaharaha. These worldly bonds, which can be described as my wife, my son, my money, my property, and so on, arise from one's identification with the physical body. This identification with the body was referred to by Shankara as aham or ahankara. The word aham means I and is the stem, whereas mama or my is the branches. The self-analysis given by Shankara certainly helps us in attaining detachment from the worldly bonds. It should be considered as a helper. But developing attraction or devotion for God, which is based on acquiring the complete knowledge of God's divine personality, has two advantages. The first advantage is that it brings total detachment. In fact, it can also sometimes lead to the disappearance of even the basic I, resulting in the soul's perfect monism with God. Ekameva dvitiyam brahma, as is said in the Veda. The second advantage is that it not only leads to the detachment from the worldly bonds, but it also brings a permanent attachment to God. On the other hand, self-analysis can, at the most, only bring detachment from the worldly bonds. It does not bring attachment to God, which is a big disadvantage. But even though Shankara's path of self-analysis cannot bring attachment or devotion to God, it is certainly helpful in developing devotion. Devotion to God is certainly far higher than mere detachment from one's worldly bonds. Shankara himself said that devotion to God is the highest and most effective spiritual path. He said, Moksha sadhana samagrayam bhaktireva gariyasi. As far as this spiritual effort of attaining devotion is concerned, the knowledge of self-analysis only acts as a helper. This knowledge of self-analysis is only a small part of the entire spiritual knowledge. The major part of the total spiritual knowledge is the knowledge of the personality of God. The total spiritual knowledge, which mainly includes the knowledge of the personality of God, is extremely important, and it stands as the very basis of the entire spiritual effort. It alone generates devotion. The knowledge of self-analysis is the helper, while the total spiritual knowledge is the very basis of the entire spiritual effort. In short, knowledge alone is both the helper and the basis of the entire spiritual effort. Knowledge, devotion, and service. The knowledge of the personality of God is the cause for developing attraction or devotion to God. Both the knowledge of God and the devotion, which is the emotion that it generates, are theoretical or mental. The devotion in turn generates service and the sacrifice of the fruit of one's work to God, which are both practical. This practical part can also be called practical devotion, since it stands as the proof of the theoretical devotion. The path to please God is practice, which is called karma yoga. This karma yoga is based on devotion, which is called bhakti yoga. And the bhakti yoga in turn is based on knowledge, which is called jnana yoga. Thus, knowledge, devotion, and practice, which includes both service and sacrifice, are the three sequential steps in the spiritual path. These three steps are commonly known as Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Karma Yoga respectively. They were respectively emphasized by the three divine preachers Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhva, who came one after the other in that same sequence. Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that propagating divine spiritual knowledge pleases the Lord greatly. Jnana yajnena tenaham. Spiritual knowledge brings about permanent harmony and peace in the world. So join us in sharing this universal divine knowledge of Lord Datta and earn the highest grace of God.